Okay, so we've been talking about coincidences, right? Like when it feels like more than just chance, like a little nudge from something bigger.
Right, those moments where you're just like, no way, that can't be random.
Exactly. And today we are diving deep into the work of someone who's practically built a career, a life, really, around recognizing those nudges, Sophia Demas.
And her story alone, wow. I mean, talk about a diverse resume. Architecture, high-end fashion, working in mental health. It's like she's lived several lives all in one.
No kidding. And somewhere in that mix, she finds time to work with, get this, Buckminster Fuller himself.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah. And on top of that, she writes 2 books exploring this very thing we're talking about, coincidence, and something more. So let's get into it. Sophia talks about this turning point, a moment where she goes from skeptic to full-on believer in the power of coincidence. What was it about that moment that changed her thinking?
Well, she talks about how early on, anything mystical, anything like that, she just wasn't buying it.
Really?
Yeah, she's very much a skeptic. But she starts noticing this pattern, these weird coincidences happening more and more, especially at these major turning points in her life.
Okay, I've got to hear about these. Give me an example.
Well, it wasn't just one or two things. It was a whole series of these synchronicities. That's what she calls them. And they were so specific, so unbelievably unlikely, that she couldn't just write them off as chance anymore.
So then she starts to think, okay, maybe the universe is trying to tell me something here.
Exactly. It's like the universe was trying to push her in a certain direction. And that actually leads to a really interesting point, because she admits there were times she resisted that push, those signs.
Oh, I have to hear about this. Tell me about a time that Sophia ignored those signs. What happened?
So in one of her books, she talks about this job offer she got, right? But it wasn't just the offer itself. She had this really strong gut feeling about it, plus a bunch of other weird coincidences, all pointing to this one opportunity.
Okay, so all signs point to take the job.
Right. But she hesitates, doubts her intuition, and ends up taking a different path, one that seemed more logical at the time.
Oh no, I bet this doesn't end well.
Nope. Within a few months, that logical choice completely backfires, and guess where she ends up?
Back at that original job offer. No way.
Yep. Right back where those initial signs were leading her all along.
Okay, see, now that's both incredible and a little terrifying. It makes you wonder how often we're missing those kinds of cosmic breadcrumbs in our own lives, you know?
That's exactly what Sophia talks about, how we're constantly bombarded with these synchronicities, but we're so conditioned to just dismiss them as random chance.
So how do we break free from that?
Well, she talks about the need to cultivate awareness, to start paying attention to those subtle patterns, those gut feelings. It's about learning to trust that inner voice, even when it doesn't make sense logically.
Which brings us to Buckminster Fuller. Now, I have to admit, when I saw his name connected to her story, my mind was blown. What did Sophia take away from her time working with him?
You know, it's interesting. She doesn't outright say, Fuller taught me this about coincidence. But when you know his work, the connection is undeniable.
How so?
Well, Fuller was all about interconnectedness, understanding how everything is linked, not just in some vague sense, but in very precise, even mathematical ways.
So she's taking those ideas about systems and applying them to these seemingly random events in life.
Right. It's like maybe those random events aren't so random after all. Maybe they're all threads in this much larger, more meaningful tapestry.
Okay, get ready for the goosebumps. 'Cause we're taking this conversation to the next level. Sophia's books dive into some pretty mind-boggling stories about consciousness, even beyond death. What's one that really stuck with you?
Oh, there's this one in her first book that still gets me, about a woman who's just lost her father. Yeah, and she's heartbroken, right? So one night, she's overwhelmed with grief, and she just cries out, asking for a sign, anything to show her that her father is still out there, somewhere.
Yeah.
And right at that moment, her car radio, which had been off, suddenly blasts this song.
No way.
And it's not just any song. It's this really unique, obscure song that had this deep personal meaning just for her and her father, something they shared a connection with.
Wow. Stories like that really make you question everything, don't they? Like, what if there's so much more to consciousness than we realize?
Exactly. And Sophia doesn't present these stories as proof of an afterlife or anything, but as invitations. Like, what if we've been dismissing possibilities that we don't even fully understand?
That's a good way to put it. So we're ready to start tuning into our own aha moments. What advice does Sophia offer? How do we cultivate that connection, that sense of as she calls it, sublime happiness.
Well, she talks about this sublime happiness as coming from aligning with a greater purpose, trusting that you're being guided by something bigger than yourself. But it's not about, grand gestures or rituals. It's the everyday stuff.
Like what? Give me the practical steps.
Paying attention. Paying attention to your intuition, those gut feelings, the synchronicities that pop up. It's about recognizing the subtle ways you're already being guided if you just open yourself up to seeing them.
I love that. So after diving deep into the world of Sophia Demas, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
Honestly, what if those coincidences you've experienced, those little winks from the universe, what if they're actually threads in some grand tapestry of meaning? What if the universe is trying to tell you something? Sophia's work really encourages us to pay attention to those threads, to listen to that inner voice, and trust that there might be more to life than meets the eye.
It's not about having all the answers, right? It's about being open to the questions, the mystery of it all. I love that. Well, thank you for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of Sophia Demas. And to our listeners, go out there, pay attention to those winks from the universe. You never know what you might discover.